Good morning and welcome to this Google Hangout, Engaging Citizens, the Nuts and Bolts. For those of you who are engaged in our citizen engagement MOOC, massive online open course, you have now been through 3 weeks of the course, going over the definitions, theory, and history of citizen engagement, its role in policy making, and now finally in the 3rd week, you have been brought to citizen engagement in public service delivery. The goal of today's Google Hangout is to explore how is citizen engagement implemented in different regions, in different contexts, and in different sectors. So today we have 3 World Bank experts implementing citizen engagement in these various contexts. And first we have William Rubin. He has been practicing in the Latin American and Caribbean region for a number of years and will specifically discuss social monitoring in Peru. We also have with us Maheen Zara. She is from the Water Global Practice at the World Bank, and she'll be discussing upward and downward accountability today. Lastly, we have Nicholas Perrin, a social development specialist in the Citizen Engagement Secretariat, and he is also the Africa Citizen Engagement focal point. So we'll start out with a question, since Nicholas Perrin is heavily involved in the Citizen Engagement Secretariat. He's one of the leads here at the bank. We wanted to start off and ask him a question. In the first week of the course, Helene Grandbonnier discussed the contextual drivers of citizen engagement. In your experience, how is citizen engagement driven by inclusive institutions and accountability structures? And then separately, how is the World Bank mainstreaming citizen engagement strategy, if at all, supporting building these inclusive institutions and accountability structures?
Thank you very much, Kate, and hello everybody. So yeah, the 2 questions that we are asked, I think, are important questions, and I would like to basically address them by making a separation between 2 things that we are trying to look at when we are working on citizen engagement in the bank. I mean, we are trying to basically use the portfolio of projects that we have and the activities that we are doing to support the idea that it's important when you're working in development to have mechanisms so that you can provide services to people, but you can also receive feedback on the quality of the services. And it's important for us in terms of the operations that we are doing to make sure that basically they are efficient and they reach the outcomes that we would like them to reach. But it's also important in the support that we provide to our clients, meaning that as we do this, we are trying also to bring best practices and help our client countries to develop mechanisms that they can after sustain and they can replicate. So when we are working through that topic, we are usually working both at the project level. So we are trying, to develop mechanisms which are basically important for the project outcomes and making sure that there are communication channels between us and the beneficiaries of those projects. And we're also working at the ecosystem level. So as we are basically using the project, we are trying to influence the perception of the different actors working on those services, but also on the topic of citizen engagement in the country. So I'm not saying that everything reaches out at the end to be the perfect outcome, but this is always something that we have in mind. It's not just focus on the project only. The project is a vehicle for a bigger issue, which is basically the ecosystem. So when the question is about inclusive institution and accountability structure, I would say yes, of course, this is very important. When you work in an environment where you already have a culture of social accountability, of citizen feedback, this is easier for us to come up with some proposed mechanisms, but also to discuss with our partners on how we can sustain their effort. This is also very important to have potential institutional partners who can carry that through, and of course, inclusion is one of the factors that can basically make a difference. I mean, if you start to have organizations which are not inclusive, which are basically just serving the needs of one category versus the other, you can start already to think that maybe the principles of the start of your activity are a bit false. You need to rethink a little bit how they can basically be more inclusive for everybody and deliver that service, that public service good. But at the same time, the reality is that in most of the cases, we are not working in context where everybody is inclusive, where this accountability is well established. And that's basically a reality of the work we are doing. The countries we are working in cover a wide range of countries, from a very vibrant civil society to countries where there is no NGOs, for example, or no CSOs which are working on that topic. So we need to always think how we can basically engage with our clients in such a way that we are not assuming that we are working in the perfect environment, and try to think what is the little thread that we can pull in order to create that ecosystem discussion that we want. And just so for the mainstreaming the strategy, what we are trying to do at the moment is basically trying to find the mechanisms that make sense in the context of the project. But by doing so, we are trying to keep in mind the bigger ecosystem picture.
Great. So following on that, Maheen, in contexts where accountability is weak, how have you seen citizen engagement be built from the bottom up? And overall, what would you say is the typical interplay between upward and downward accountability? And going back to some of the points that Nicholas made, how does this impact the ultimate development objectives?
Thanks, Kate. So I would like to address the second part first. That is, what is the typical interplay between upward and downward accountability? You see, it's extremely important. If we look at the institutional structures, normally what happens is that the kind of fiscal transfers are taking place from a higher tier of the government to a lower tier of the government, and sometimes to a local utility or the basic service provider. So what we have experienced basically is that you need to strengthen the upward accountability mechanisms and then link them to the downward accountability. That is, if you have like voice, say, if you have people asking for something, or if you connect the feedback, what are you going to do to that feedback if there is no institutional space available at the upward level to use that feedback? But if the upward accountability level, for example, if the fiscal transfer is linked with the performance of the quality of service provided by the provider to the recipients, and it's based on the feedback provided by the recipients, only in that case accountability can work and result into actual development outcomes, improved development outcomes. But that's an ideal scenario. In most cases, it doesn't happen. Like, I will give you the example of the city of Karachi, for example, in Pakistan. What was happening there is that the utility is very keen to improve their systems because of their constantly deteriorating image in the public. But that utility is highly politically contested, and it is used as the employment arm of the government. So no upper tier of the government would like to have any kind of accountability or any kind of public exposure or public engagement or civic engagement in the affairs of the utility. So how we addressed this issue was interesting, because then we decided then it's not possible to address, and it's not able to we will not be able to convince if we use the top-down approach. So what we went for was mobilizing the civil society, very active civil society in Karachi, highly educated, and then not only civil society, but also general public through the use of media. For example, FM channels. They are extremely useful in engaging public. So we started through an FM channel of a campaign which was called Apna Karachi, like our Karachi, who owns Karachi, and then who owns Karachi's services. And then when people started having ownership of the utility, then we started bringing in people from the utility on the FM channel to talk about that, what are the constraints of the utility, and how they can be addressed by the policymakers or in the upper tier of the government. So naturally, the politicians had to respond to their constituency. So in that way, we were able to build up this accountability mechanism, and then policy changes were made at the provincial level, where the unpredictable fiscal transfers were linked with the performance of the utility. And it also helped in cutting down the corruption a lot.
Yeah, and how did you see that this impacted the ultimate development objectives in some of the projects that you've worked on, this and others?
In some other areas, for example, in education sector, in education sector, I've seen it working very effectively because through some certain World Bank projects, they made it mandatory to have parent-teachers associations in schools, right? Now, those parent-teachers associations were monitoring, they have their interest. I mean, their children were studying in those schools. So they were not only monitoring the physical environment, the quality of education and everything, and then providing feedback to the government. And that's substantially improved the government's detailment strategy. For example, otherwise teachers were detailed like 70 kilometers away from their residences, but on the basis of the feedback provided by citizens, by parent-teachers associations, very, very active role, it was ensured that only those teachers are detailed to schools that can make themselves available every day. So it certainly changed a lot. Then from the water and sanitation perspective, that the PTAs significantly impacted upon the physical availability of sanitation facility, for especially in girls' schools. And that resulted into increase in enrollment. And there are several examples of it. There are in India, there are some significant examples of that. In Pakistan, there are examples, and even in Northwest Frontier Province, which is considered to be, or which is now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Province.
So would you say that as a result of some of these citizen engagement initiatives in the education sector, for instance, that math and reading scores improved with children, or for instance, in the water and sanitation sector, that there were a greater number of hookups or cleaner access or better access to clean water through these citizen engagement initiatives? Was that the end result?
That
or
was the end result. For example, again, I'll give you example from Karachi, because when citizen report card exercise were conducted, the utility was shocked to find out that the area which was not mapped to their network was the most satisfied because they had illegal connections there. You see, and as a result of it, the people at the downward stream were not receiving any water. So utility was able to regulate, bring those people in the network, and it increased the tariff, which gives them space to provide subsidies in the slums areas for establishment of networks, for increasing their networks, and for improving quality of service to the downstream recipients.
Excellent. And so, William, we've discussed with Maheen and Nicholas more broadly about how citizen engagement is being implemented in these different contexts and these different sectors. But you've worked really in depth with social monitoring in Peru to really aim that at improving basic health and nutrition services. How have you seen development results improve as a result of the citizen engagement? And particularly, which is a big challenge in citizen engagement, how do you reach those or engage those marginalized and vulnerable groups? And how has your team been successful in this challenge?
Okay. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this very interesting experience in Peru. Basically, it is the social monitoring. It's a mechanism that has been supported by a World Bank project, the nutrition project, the World Bank. And it's set to establish a mechanism by which the users of the nutrition services, mainly mothers, but also the local leaders, and also we have made an effort to include the mayors, local governments, all together monitor the quality of nutrition and health services. How do they do that? Basically, they do that just tracking 4 basic indicators. And this is very important. The simplicity is very important. And those indicators are broadly explained to the participants so that they track and they get information. They get hard data every month about those indicators so that they can track what is going on in terms of the quality of the services that they are receiving. And this mechanism was set up because there was an assessment of the nutrition service, and the conclusion was that there was a low-level equilibrium. What does it mean? It was a complacent equilibrium between the users, the receivers of the services, the service providers, and the regulators. All were happy, but the results were not good at all. So the whole monitoring system, what tries to do is to give those indicators which reflect basic standards of the quality of the service, so that the recipients of the service know what their rights are, what they can expect out of the service in terms of the quality, the opportunity, the timeliness of the service that they receive. So once they have these indicators clear and they receive the data, they track and they participate in different type of fora.
The recipients are
The
participating
recipients participate, yeah,
in this social monitoring process.
in the social monitoring process. And yes, at the end, every 6 months, there is a town hall where it's a broad participation of different stakeholders, the recipients, the service providers, and they track what has happened with these basic indicators. And out of this town hall, there is a plan that is also then monitored, a plan to tackle the main barriers and main problems.
And how do you ensure that, sometimes in these processes, there can be elite capture, or there can be kind of a issue of the usual suspects being there, rather than some of the actual marginalized and vulnerable groups that need to be present. How did your team address that in this process?
Well, it's basically through the town hall. The town hall is an open invitation to all the citizens of a given district to participate. And so they have the right to be there, and there is also because the districts where this project is working is basically indigenous districts. So there is a permanent communication in indigenous languages to make sure that the participants, women, the teachers, all the different stakeholders of the communities, they are invited to participate in the town hall.
And Maheen, have you experienced this in any of your projects where you try to reach out specifically to certain marginalized and vulnerable groups, or make sure they're included in some of these processes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But otherwise, there would be a lead capture. If we just, for example, if we just talk to civil society organizations, many of them are not even considered represented by those marginalized communities. They don't even have access there. So what we tried to do was that for example, in Karachi, before starting the citizen report card exercise, first we selected a cross-cutting. We did a cross-section of the town and cross-section of the city, and identified towns based on their socio-economic status, number one. Number two, we started creating this trust that, people have this fear and or a lack of trust that what will happen? What if I provide feedback? What if I give you like 15 minutes of my time to fill up this survey or answer your questions? What will be the result? So in those communities like slums areas, mainly occupants were either beggars or servants, or these were like slum areas, we organized like street theaters to have this awareness that people have their rights. You have a right to speak, you have a right for services, and what you are doing, I mean, you are paying much more for water to an illegal source than what you will pay to the utility. So that created, and then a special effort is needed to bring in those people. So that's why I find that, it's important to specifically identify those marginalized areas. There are other examples. For example, right now I'm trying to work in Kosovo, where it's a project which has a water security component plus a water utility component.
And so that's excellent. And going back, William, to how this improved, how the citizen engagement, the social monitoring improved, did you see an improvement in the basic health and nutrition service and nutritional services indicators?
We even have a strong evidence because there are areas where the social monitoring is working, and there are other areas, but in the same region, where the social monitoring has not been established. And now you can compare results. And so we're even planning to do a counterfactual assessment. But right now, the simple data that we have at hand tell us that it has made a big difference in terms of the results. Nutrition, malnutrition, infant malnutrition has not gone down. Registration of children in the social programs have increased in those areas where the social monitoring is working.
Excellent. And so bringing this back into the bigger picture at the World Bank, Nicholas, how do you see some of these things that Maheen and William have talked about improving citizen engagement leading to improved development outcomes? How does the bank capture that? And I know the strategic framework only came out a couple of years ago, and a lot of these indicators are still in development currently. But in your role at the Citizen Engagement Secretariat at the World Bank, how are you working to capture this overall at the bank and look at the improvement over time?
Okay, thank you. I think we need to distinguish two things. One is the monitoring of what is being done from the impact. I mean, on the impact, I think you're preaching for convinced people, meaning that we feel that citizen engagement is an important mechanism to improve project outcomes and development. But I don't think it's only in the bank. I think it's across all institutions. The evidence of this impact is still difficult to produce. We see it, but we still haven't seen, yet one document that provides an exhaustive explanation of the impact of some of those mechanisms. I mean, there are bits and pieces, but there is not like, a regular production of this. So I think this is something that a lot of institutions are thinking about now, how to better monitor what is being done, but also create baseline and then, try to see the impact, because they are, it's complex, meaning that we are providing examples of systems, but it's usually the several systems that operates together, plus some political dimension that sometimes kicks in and technical issues as well. So when you want to basically see the impact, you need to have at least like you were saying, one case where it did not work and one case where it works, so you can compare. And you need to have the data to do this. And I think that's something that now people are aware and trying to produce. But I think it will take a few months, maybe a few years to come with more evidence. I think we are producing it, but it's still nascent. Then the second thing about the monitoring, the World Bank is monitoring the fact that we have in all the new projects mechanisms which are dealing with beneficiary feedback, which can lead to citizen engagement, and by doing so, we are trying to make sure that each new project that we have has one indicator that basically will give us information about the beneficiary feedback. So the way it is done at the moment, because of the complexity of the type of projects we have, meaning that we can have a project on education reform, but we can also build a motorway, and we can also work, on school attendance. So we have a lot of different projects. So we cannot have one indicator that focus on everything. So each project have their indicators, and that's what we are trying to look at. We are trying to make sure that at least all the new projects starting from last year, when they are designed, have a part which explains what type of citizen engagement mechanisms they will implement. And secondly, they have at least one indicator that allows us to see how at least one of these mechanisms is being done. We will see, I think, in a year or so what will be the outcome of this, if it provides us enough information. I'm afraid it won't, but at least it will give us. If you want, it's not just to monitor; it's also to make sure that we implement it and we do it. So this is also the way to look at it.
Well, that's great. Well, this brings us to our question and answer period from the audience. So a lot of you who have been participating in the Citizen Engagement MOOC have already submitted questions on our discussion forums. So I'll be able to choose a few of those to ask to you all. And then also you're able to ask questions live on Twitter at #CitizensEngage. And also through our Google Hangout online, you can type directly underneath the screen that you see right now. So moving on to some of those questions, let's start off with you, William. So one of our learners from the Citizen Engagement MOOC, Parev, he asked, what are challenges to make citizen engagement more effective in less developed countries? And perhaps you could also speak to less developed contexts. For instance, there's different regions have different levels of development. And then also, how can citizen engagement be effective in those countries and those contexts? So,
yeah, I think it's the critical aspect is the enabling environment to make sure that there are institutions, that there are conditions that will enable citizens to freely participate, to have a say in the development process, and that's a difficult issue. And I think that the World Bank or the other institutions that the World Bank can play a very important role in supporting the creation of an enabling environment for participation. So it's beyond the projects. It's more how the World Bank can influence through the dialogue, through different operations, influence governments to make sure that the environment is better off for citizens to engage, and especially for those in rural areas and poorest communities. That, of course, is a big challenge, and it's something that will require time and consistent approach from the development institutions around the world.
great. And following on this, Maheen, we have a question from several different participants in the discussion forum that you may be well placed to answer, and that is, how can citizen engagement take place in places where there's a one-party system, or you're in a fragile and conflict-affected area or state where there is a high potential for conflict escalation? And this comes from Al-Osman Mohammed, Caroline Caesar, and Tang Nugent. If you could speak to that a little bit, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
I find it very interesting because, you see, my experience is, and not only mine, but I mean, it is documented. You have some, I can provide you a list of documents that provide you lessons learned, that citizen engagement works best in less developed countries. Yeah, something that I have noticed that, you know, in more developed countries, citizens are the service provision is more like corporatized and all that, and you know, the context is already there. But in less developed countries, I know it is challenging, but it works best. In conflict-affected areas, I'll give you example from FATA, federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, and which is like the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Highly conflict-affected areas. In those areas, the myth was that you cannot talk to people. You know, and what I find very, very interesting was that citizen engagement worked best over there because mostly development workers couldn't go there. It's a matter of using innovative methods of engaging citizens. For example, provision of GPS-enabled systems. If an infrastructure project is going on, Army is undertaking that project, but we don't know whether the infrastructure was actually rehabilitated or not. But citizens were provided like cell phones with GPS devices from where they can just picture the infrastructure and send it back to us that, you know, actually it's happening or not happening. So in fragile affected, and the other very important aspect I find is that citizen engagement is the best way of controlling the conflict. I mean, I know it seems like a very idealistic approach, but we have seen it by forming groups like Women Against Terrorism and, you know, those kind of approaches towards citizen engagement, where if you provide them, if you engage them in the process, if you talk to them that what's actually happening, they will give you solutions, you know, and those solutions actually result into some certain development outcomes which are not possible by consultants going there and developing infrastructure programs and even identification of places. So the other thing I would like to emphasize is that citizen engagement is not just about monitoring and accountability. Citizen engagement, I believe, should start right at the beginning of the initiative when we are going in there and first of all talking to all stakeholders, not only just our clients, but who our clients are actually providing services to. Because our purpose is to improve services and development outcomes, not just reimbursement. So my problem at times I feel like most of the World Bank projects when I was in the country office were focused on reimbursement. Or disbursement, you know, disbursements, how much disbursements. The outputs were measured mainly in the form of disbursements. My issue was when I joined the World Bank, I was one of those people who used to question that you're talking about disbursements. What about actual results? How did it improve the system, or whether it just pumped into a corrupt system some more money? So citizen engagement, if we get it right from the beginning of the project, it really helps. And then continuing to engage them in the process. That's the key, especially in less developed areas, giving people this empowerment which they don't have from other places.
Great. And so kind of following on that integration into the project, Nicholas, we have a question from Ivan Butania regarding, my question is about the World Bank Group, including citizen engagement in its project. How can we make sure that citizen engagement doesn't become a box to be checked, but instead is an integral part of the project? And how can support, I would assume in this institution and also in other institutions, be provided to these project leads? So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a risk. I mean, when you start to mainstream things, I mean, it's not just for the World Bank, it's true for any kind of administration. As soon as you start to mainstream something, there is a risk that it's taken as a requirement that needs to be met in order to proceed, and therefore you try to find a shortcut in order to do this. So that's true for citizen engagement, but that's true for many things. I mean, like gender, that's true for environment and so on. So the way that we are trying to look at is basically to keep in mind both the requirements that we have in terms of making sure that new projects have these mechanisms in place, but also trying to focus also on the quality. So the quality comes when you do the design, but also very much when you do the implementation. So that means that what we are trying to do is being transparent about what we are doing. So having regular discussions across the bank about the type of indicators that are being used, the type of mechanisms that are being used, the issues that we are having in implementing those. But also outside of the World Bank, we have an external advisory group which basically meet every quarter, more or less, where we are sharing with them the results of the implementation of the reform so far, and seek for advice as well on how to do this. The message that is given to task teams in the World Bank is that this is something that we have to do because this is good for development. This is a mandate that our institution has. But it should be done in such a way that it actually creates an incentive for the client and for the beneficiaries, so that basically we improve the project outcomes. So we try to make sure when we are discussing with teams, and when I say we, I mean the technical specialists working on those issues, but also the sector leads following that thing, that the message that is being given is not a message of compliance, but a message of what makes it useful for you, why should you do citizen engagement, and how will it improve the project outcomes. Maureen was discussing about the issue of doing citizen engagement in close polities or difficult environment. I mean, I work quite a lot in closed polities. I mean, in government, in ECA, or the places where you don't have much civil society. And I tend to agree that actually when you don't have much, it's actually not that difficult to do something. Yes. Because but you need to see how you package it. You need to see how you design it. Remember that citizen engagement is a process. You have different levels. I mean, if you try to reach the moon from the start in a closed environment, that's maybe going to be too difficult. But if you start gradually to work on issues such as transparency of information, basic feedback, then you start to create an appetite for it. And I think for many of those countries, service delivery is important because that's part of the social contract, meaning that you are a bit authoritarian, but your responsibility as a state is to provide for your people. And so when you start to work on those issues regarding the lens of service delivery, then it's a door that opens and then can grow. And it's the same a little bit for the projects that we are working with. If we start right away with project teams telling them you need to do citizen engagement, a lot of them will feel very overwhelmed and a little bit off track. But if you talk about improve the service delivery of your project, get feedback so you can be more cost efficient, more effective in the outreach. And I mean, we're talking a lot about public goods, but actually a lot of private businesses are doing service delivery feedback. I mean, for people, if you put it like this, it's an incentive to actually do it better.
Great. And we have a question from Twitter. So I'll open this up to both William and Maheen. This is from Farida Binna. She just wants to know kind of basically, how does a development project promote citizen engagement? Just at a basic level. And what have you learned so far?
Well, I think that there are different ways in which a project can promote civic engagement. Probably the most effective one is, well, that you include in the design of the project civic engagement mechanisms as part of the project, and especially as part of what the project supports, to make sure that it endures and that it's sustainable once the project ends, so that these mechanisms are part of the design of the project. Are components or subcomponents of the project and are aligned with the other components of the project. But of course, you can also have some ways of improving civic engagement just through the monitoring of the project results themselves. That means that it's not that the project is supporting a specific mechanism, but that the project enables the participation of the users, of the beneficiaries, to track results of the project itself. So those are basic ways in which the project can support civic engagement in a given country. But what is very important is that the project also creates the possibility of having a dialogue with the client, with the government, to ensure that they open up to civic engagement, that they support also civic engagement mechanisms and channels of participation, so that the project can also support the enabling environment in the specific area in which it is working.
Good. And following on that, Maheen, we have another question from Twitter from Kanoa Sanders. She wants to know, how can civic engagement be improved for minority communities in countries traditionally viewed as an open society like the United States? So in more developed contexts, where maybe there's a perception that there is already a large amount of citizen engagement, or strong institutions or strong accountability structures, how do you think it could be improved in these developed contexts? Not that your experience is mostly in these areas, but just
I think it's a very good question. It's an extremely good question, because these days I'm volunteering at a place which is like a shelter for, and there is no discrimination of race, faith, or anything in that shelter. People come over there, and what I find very interesting is that in this very, very developed society, there are people who think they don't have any voice. In terms of they don't have access to education, they don't have access to clean water and say proper sanitation. They don't have a place to sleep. They don't have access. They don't have access to opportunities to grow, and opportunities that normally people have, as you call it, American dream. Those people do not have it. So I think more important is to look at these informal places where these people gather around and talk to them in focus group discussions and all those things, and then provide that feedback. For example, I am a member of the DCC, the Democratic Congressional Committee. So collecting feedback from there and providing it to them has become, a norm for people like me and some people who are also working in that shelter. So I think that's a way.
Great.
I just want to make one more comment here about the question that you asked about how a development project can enhance citizen engagement. And very, very brief story from an Asian Development Bank project. From the beginning of the project, the preparation, we need to provide evidence that citizen engagement led to good development outcomes to the client. So they are open to the idea. Once they are open to the idea, then assess their capacities, whether they have the capacity to engage citizens, and whether there's in supply side people have this confidence that their voice will be heard. On working on those both levels needs to be a continuous project in a development project in order to enhance civic engagement and to induce a culture of civic engagement within the community. Oftentimes it happens that our clients, they don't have the budget to have social mobilizers and others. And so help them, bringing in our economists, our financial sector specialists, to help them develop those systems that that will allocate budgets for having civic engagement processes in the projects.
Great. So we're about to end our time here with the Google Hangout, and I just wanted to give you each just a few seconds or a minute to wrap up kind of what has been your most important takeaway from your experiences in citizen engagement. And William, we can start with you and just give any concluding remarks before we end our session.
Yeah, perhaps that adds to what has been discussed here. First of all, we have to be clear about participation. I mean, participation is always there in the community. It's not only that we're inventing participation. Communities participate in very different ways. The big challenge is how this participation can lead to some effectiveness and lead to results. And that's where the challenge is what kind of mechanisms, channels you create or you support in order to make this participation effective and make sure that this participation, which requires a lot of effort from people, participation is not free. So it involves a lot of time and effort, travel, time. So it is important to make sure that this participation leads to results. And this is, I think, is the big challenge for an institution like the World Bank and other development institutions.
I just want to focus on one thing, and that is, I find working with the task team leaders in the World Bank, that the most important thing for them is to see the result, that whether it will result, because if it is a corporate indicator, it will only create resentment. I have seen it happening. People were like, very, very resented. Just do something and get it out of my way. But if you can show them results that actually it has resulted into something, only then they are fully convinced and fully on board and will provide you space to, to go for real impact. And the other thing is, very, very important thing to remember is that it's not a race, a 3 years of time period oriented race. It's a journey. You have to take step by step as a process. So that's what my biggest challenge is.
Yeah, so yeah, for me, I would add to what my colleagues have said. Also, embrace the complexity, meaning that I don't think there is one size fits all, and I don't think we can. There is not one mechanism that is magic and we need to do. So, there are already things doing that are operating. Very often, it's a matter of channeling it better, making it more efficient, and try to look at how basically we can also combine different things. How to combine consultation processes with surveys or with ICT for feedback. Or there are a lot of different ways. And the complexity comes from the context, meaning that you cannot do the same thing everywhere. There are issues that you need to consider about the willingness of people to participate, their capacity to do it, either because of political or economic reasons and so on. So you need to basically do a good assessment at the beginning to see why this engagement could be a plus in the service that you are delivering, and what type of people need to really have a little bit of push in order to access to these channels. And then, I think having a careful implementation is key. So meaning that it's good to have feedback about not just the project, but also the feedback mechanisms that you are doing. Is it the right one? Are people feeling correctly reached out, and is it useful for them? Because you will go to one meeting and 2 meetings, but if nothing comes out of it, you will probably not go to the third one. So.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We hope that this discussion, after weeks of learning from the videos and from the quizzes and the resources and the materials, that this has given you a little bit better of an understanding of the actual nuts and bolts of citizen engagement. So we look forward to the next 2 weeks, which will be, next week will be innovations in citizen engagement. And the last week, which is new this year, will be citizen engagement in practice, where we hope to build on some of these experiences that we discussed today. The next Google Hangout will be Tuesday, March 1st at the same time, 10 a.m. So we look forward to seeing you online then, and also in our discussion forums on the online citizen engagement MOOC. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.